I'm gonna sit up so I look
Okay.
You slouch there.
Okay, cool.
I feel like I should get the InkForge out.
So first of all, what do you guys do at InkForge? You are InkForge.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially I started InkForge in August of last year, and I then am acting now as creative director. So essentially I'm the guy who kind of broadly speaking comes up with the creative ideas for the game. Essentially creative director, I mean, as a blanket term, it's a bit naff. There's no like set definition for what a creative director does in industry. To me, it means more like I have the creative control. Yeah, so typically I will pitch the ideas, and that's where Archie comes in.
So I feel like an easier way to explain it is like a spearhead. Tom is like at the top. A pyramid scheme. Tom is at the top of the pyramid, and the ideas filter down, but the end goal is to hit the pyramid, and everyone kind of filters up to that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how.
And then like my ideas will change depending on development.
Yeah.
It's not like I have got a set idea from day one, and then it's that idea at the end. So that's essentially my role as creative director.
I am the 2D artist and animator at InkForge Studios. I joined them last year, 2023, and I've worked with them for about like 4 months now, I'd say. It's been almost half a year, I think. So yeah, I've worked on I'll Be Brave Tomorrow. I came on initially to design the bird as the main character and do all the animations for that, and then subsequently I've now worked on Rhythm Reunion for the recent game jam, which was a very fun experience. For I'll Be Brave Tomorrow, I've also worked on the key art. So when you open up the Steam page or the LinkedIn, the first thing you'll see is the key art that I designed. I've also done the new snail animations. They recently, in the latest update, I believe, they got introduced. I also did the frog animations. So the frog enemies in level 3, as well as Freddy the Frog, the boss, which is potentially named after me. I'm not too sure. I found out about that after I joined the team. I worked on the hedgehog as well. So mostly just the player and the enemies and all that. The backgrounds are not me. That's Hermione, our lovely artist.
My role, I guess, in InkForge development is primarily 3D modeling, although I am trying to sort of learn 3D animation as well now, because there's been a few times where we've wanted to implement 3D animated stuff and it's just not been possible. That's pretty much where my role ends, almost entirely 3D stuff. So Split Polarity was the first thing I did, I guess, and that was almost separate to InkForge. InkForge just published it. That was during my first year of uni. Again, almost entirely 3D. I mean, with small scale projects like that, I mean, every person kind of has to step out their own comfort zone. So almost all of us kind of helped develop the idea into being something playable and then contributed our own sort of disciplines to that. I mean, I guess that carries over to I'll Be Brave Tomorrow as well. Again, primarily 3D, but I've had my say in certain aspects of the game, level design and marketing, I suppose, in some ways.
I write and release music under the name Snosm, and I've been involved with making music for a few of InkForge's projects in the past, and they brought me along for this, so I can write the tracks for Project Reunion. I did a couple tracks for Simu, and a few tracks for their latest project, I'll Be Brave Tomorrow. Starting with Simu, Tom told me what the main idea behind the game was. I'm not sure he was actually finished with it at the time, but he showed me the Bad Space comic, which the game was based on. And so I took the idea, the build-up and the dread of that whole comic, and I started writing a track with it. And the idea for that was mainly behind reusing an old idea, because I've wanted to write one track about a space person for a long time, and so I took that kind of guitar idea and the build up and all of that sort of thing before the big clashing chords of the piece came through, and that was kind of the horror of the situation. That was the main track behind Simu, and as the game progressed, I think he paced it so that more of the song would unfold as the situation got worse and worse. the other track I did for Simu was just sort of an ambient feel. I think it plays during the menu and maybe a bit when things are calmer at the start. For Brave Tomorrow, I did a few tracks for that. All of those tracks were slightly different in terms of what the game needed. I was given Yoshi's Island as the main kind of inspiration and idea for it, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. But when it came to Yoshi's Island, I wasn't sure if I was trying to emulate the kind of happy feeling of Yoshi's Island and the kind of whole vibe of that, or if I also wanted to emulate kind of the sounds that were used in classic retro consoles, like I think Super Nintendo is what Yoshi's Island was on. So I was kind of split and torn about that. So what I did was I made one track which was just the feeling and a whole upbeat vibe, and it sounds quite very bright and modern because I didn't really bother using Super Nintendo sampling, bit crushing, or anything that would make it sound more quote-unquote retro. And so that was the first track. The first track was, I think, Flight the Flutter or something is what it's called. It's the that one. I did that one just kind of with the whole upbeat feeling of it. I was playing some of the gameplay footage he sent me and seeing how it felt with the feeling, and I really liked that. And then with Bird Scarf, I tried to reel it in a little bit and play around with some bit crushing and that kind of thing, and more simple. And then for the last track was kind of intended as maybe a boss track or maybe just a more difficult area.
Yeah, I am technical director. That essentially means I keep Tom's ego in check as a blanket term. He comes up with the grandiose ideas and I reframe them and compact them into actual ideas. That is what I would actually say my role is listening to Tom and compacting Tom's idea into something
realistic.
Yeah. I think Tom always pitches games as AAA when there's 4 of us or 5 of us on the team. So
yeah,
I guess more broadly speaking, I'm mainly the fixer guy. Because QA background, it just becomes a case of I generally make the game fixed. So I worked at a company, university speaking. They were pretty good. I still am actually employed with them, so might be going back this summer. So I worked there for combined 2.5 years probably. First 9 months I was a QA tester on VR, specifically just mainly for Meta. Beat Saber's my big one. I'm credited for that. Very grateful to work on that as a tester and a few days here and there as a lead. The Last Clockwind is my favourite project that I've been on. That's all VR. And I've also worked on some big AAA games. Because I'm not credited in a lot of them, I can't actually say because NDAs. Big AAA sports titles is the term I would use. Also other big AAA games from my favourite publisher.
But I think one important thing about the way that we kind of work as both directors is it's kind of beauty out of conflict. If we are not constantly at odds with each other, nothing will get done the way we need it to get done.
Yeah.
We are kind of two opposing forces. That's kind of how it works. Because we can both not necessarily have our way. We have to find the middle ground between what's technical and realistic and what's grandiose and not creative, but more creative. Without us having to argue all the time and kind of hammer out our ideas, we wouldn't be where we are now.
Yeah. You saw us argue essentially for 2 hours about a visual novel. So, it happens in everything, but luckily we're both the character that nothing gets taken to heart.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where most of our best ideas come from, because we're constantly at each other's throats trying to find the best solution to problems.
Yeah.
So do you allocate some level of the creative process to other people in the team?
As much as, and this sounds bad, but as much as I'm comfortable doing. So I'm happy to give people creative control in terms of what they make in their own style. But as a whole, I need X asset made in X size, in X format, if that makes sense. So if I say to one of the artists, I need this bird to have a jump animation, I'm not going to be I want each of 7 frames long, and I want this feather to do this. I'm like, no, I'll let them do it how they want, but it needs to kind of match up with how I'm thinking of it. As not the artist, but the creative director, it is a bit like I'm kind of giving away a lot. And thankfully, because we've got such great artists, I'm more scared by it. But yeah, that's essentially what I have to do.
Specifically in InkForge, I have been mostly left to do it to my interpretation, like my style in a way. Obviously, I send through like works in progress and like ideas to Tom and Archie just to give like the yes, they like this, just in case it's not fitting with their vision as well. But they mostly trust me to make something that looks good. And for Rhythm Reunion completely, I was just given free creative control over how the characters were looked. It was just, I needed to have an animated character and a comic book character. And then that was basically it. They gave me like an idea of the personality they'd have, but it was quite stereotypical, so I already guessed what they'd want, really.
I'm going to speak in regards to I'll Be Broke Tomorrow primarily, since it's the biggest project I've worked on. I guess the plan was always to have a 2D and 3D world separate to each other. In this case, Archie, one of our, I think the technical director, kind of composed the scene from all the stuff from Poly Pizza. And then as time went on, Tom would let me know of things that were required for the world. And then based on what they were, I just model them. It's hard to explain it past that. Because they're so low poly and so simple, it really doesn't take much thinking or planning to just get them done. I mean, I guess it leads me on to this point, which is I'm like studying to be a character artist now, because that does let me then sort of project my own style onto things. Because character concepts almost have to be engaging visually, there's a lot more room to sort of experiment with things that are interesting and people want to look at. And a lot of the time, the things people want to look at don't typically exist in the real world.
This current game you're making, where did the idea come from? Where is it going?
So currently we're taking part in a game jam. Well, this is a worldwide event. This is a global game jam 2024, where developers are given a theme and they have to make a game in roughly, depends on the game jam, this one is 48 hours. And they come up with an idea for a game and then just make it 48 hours and then release it into the world. And typically you don't have ideas going into it, you don't have a solid team foundation going into it. So it's kind of a chance to kind of flex the pre-production skills and working in a really fast, kind of ideating way without getting bogged down into specifics or details, which you don't have time for. But it's a great opportunity for developers to kind of try out things, see what works. I think you see a lot of games like Hollow Knight, which started out as a game jam project, which was completely different to how the game is now. But it started out by just a simple idea, kind of tested and seen to its kind of capabilities in 48 hours. So we came into this with a theme that was given to us, which was Make Me Laugh. Typically we're not comedy writers. Comedy writers is not really our specialty. So we tried to take it at more of an InkForge angle, which was we have aspects of comedy but told in our way. So we have certain interactions and certain characters who have funny traits, but they're not just one-dimensional comedy man, do comedy thing.
Yeah, a quick TLDR of the game. We have gone for a visual novel where you are putting a band back together, like a certain episode of a TV show. Yeah, essentially, we're not comedy writers, but we're trying to make you laugh. That's the whole theme. So, very simply, we just want to make things as stupid in the most formal way as possible. Things are we're still writing professionally, we're writing how we do write, but trying to just make things a bit more funny than our usual takes.
So in Rhythm Reunion, I created 2 characters for the game. I was purely just on doing the character art. I did Emma, or EMA. I worked on her initially for the first 2 days, mostly, was just working on Emma. She was meant to be a very stereotypical anime girl, which meant it wasn't too hard to find a lot of references everywhere online, but it took a lot more time than my other character, Max Power. We'll get onto him later, because mostly with the art style, there's very thin line art, and there's like a certain style of cell shading, and the eyes need to be super detailed. It's just kind of like one of the tropes that goes along with the game. So she was a fun character to work on. And then for my second character, Max Power, he was done entirely on the third day of production, which was a bit stressful. For Max Power, that was all done day 3. He was inspired. We were thinking for a comic book style. I'd recently seen some artwork for the Hellboy comics, which I'd seen like bits of before, but they're very cool. They're very stylized. I'd recommend checking them out. I'm gonna buy a couple of the comics, I think, because it looks really cool. But that is a much dirtier, for lack of a better word, style. You don't need to be as careful with your lines. It's quite quick because it is comic booky. They had a quota to meet, so they had to make like 60 images per however long it is. I only drew the characters from about the thigh up, apart from the full art where he's playing the instrument. But that made it a lot easier to draw. Also because of the heavy like black shading, a lot of detail could be cut out in the shadow areas, and it also it's quite good to make emotions show. You can kind of highlight the emotions, and then colors were very simple for him. So very simple, but it came out very nicely. I am quite proud of Max Power.
I guess the whole premise of Rhythm Reunion was we each took a character to make in our own like art style / discipline, I suppose. And mine being 3D, I decided to do something more similar to an object. So I chose to do a robot. Like a person would have been okay too, but organic shapes are always going to take more time than something more primitive like a robot. Plus I think they're cool. So I mean, as I was explaining to you as we were doing the project, I'm not going to be able to draw my concept out as well as I could just get started with it. And because I was using such simple shapes like cylinders and circles, spheres, rectangles, whatnot, you can spawn those in almost immediately in 3D. So I guess the ideation process was also just modeling process. I don't know if that's the most efficient way to do it. That's just how I do it.
Into this, we didn't even have concept art, because usually when I've had to compose for the games in the past, I've had a piece of gameplay or like an illustration or the core idea of it, with the Bad Space comic. With this, I had nothing. All I had was the basic outline of what each character would be, so like a robot or anime girl or even a stick man. That and the instrument they were playing. And so with those ideas behind the characters, I try and create parts for them that would match their design background, and also, what would a robot play on the bass? What would an anime girl play on the bass? I bumped the mic. So the idea for the music of Project Reunion was based off the idea for Outer Wilds, meeting and gathering the travelers, and as you meet them and they come around a campfire, each of them adds their own layer of musical instrument to what the whole band is playing. And that lends itself really well to the idea of recruiting and getting a whole band back together. So that was the basic idea. And then, of course, there was meeting each of the characters individually. And the main idea behind that was to pull the part that they'd be playing all together and have that as the basis of their main theme. Earlier on, we were thinking that it would just be that part for that character, but thinking about it, that would sound really sparse and not really great at all. So what instead we did was tried to pull the main part and then build a track around that to reflect the whole personality of that character. The most successful examples of this were with the robot bass guitar. That took the exact part. Maybe I made it a little bit faster and I added a whole bunch of wompy sounding circuit effects and synths and that kind of thing. That worked really well in that track. I used the same drums for the anime, good old anime cashier girl. That was kind of interesting because I wanted to maybe make a kind of anime opening kind of sound of a track, but ended up going with a kind of more video gamey 16-bit chiptune kind of song. Where we ended up deviating from that was the detective who plays Keys. His theme ended up with a very somber piano track, but that kind of lent to a kind of comedy when in the band he plays a very upbeat synth, very bright synth sound, which goes against what his character is. But that's kind of the whole joke of him, is that he's gone from a very fun and bright kind of band to being a very somber, grizzled old detective on the force kind of thing.
Scope-wise, we try and nail it as small as possible so that it's confirmed to be done in 48 hours, and then if we have time, then expand. Because that's probably the key aspects of most people fail in a game jam is they go too wide too early and then don't finish it. Whereas the best game jams are so small that if they have time, they should get bigger. Because it's easy to expand a game, it's so hard to keep a game small. So
yeah, it's kind of imagine a 2-year development cycle kind of squished down to its basics for 48 hours, where you go through pre-production, production, and then polishing in literally 3 days.
So in terms of artwork, you can kind of go on forever. It's very hard to find a place to stop. It's all generally to do with your experience and like the style and like your mind's eye of where you want it to go. Like when you start drawing, or at least when I start drawing, I have an image of where I want it to be, and that it depends on the time. Because it's very true that after a while you do get sick of some artworks. I know I find it hard to look at some of the ones I did for the game because I just had to get them out there. I would love to spend more time on it, but I'm happy with where I got within the designated time frame. But it is normally a case of I will go to a point where I'm either happy or I think it's good enough. Those are my two main factors.
So yeah, with 3D, it's like there's a lot more than just how it looks. Like there's a lot of technical stuff like making sure that the lighting on the model works, and because you have to work with polygons and squares and stuff, it means that you can't actually have curves. You can only have stuff that looks like curves, and so the lighting has to work to make it look like a curve. The same way that you would draw something on a 2D plane, like a piece of paper, and you'd use shading to make it look three-dimensional. And a lot of the time, if there isn't time to do that, you can cut things like that out. There is stuff that you've got to sacrifice, and if I had more time, then I would have spent more time making sure that the model functioned as it should, and then I could have taken it out of the modeling software and textured it properly. Because you'll notice that I only used like flat red, flat yellow, and like greys to make the metally shine, I guess, for the robot, whereas he could have done with actual textures. It just wasn't possible in the time frame. But outside of that, not necessarily. It's not so time consuming that I would need weeks to finish a model entirely, but when you do put that time limit on it, then yeah, you do need to cut corners. I think I call the line when I feel I need to, which doesn't make much sense, but I guess I look at how much time's left, and because I've been doing it a while, I know how much time it will take to get it colored and rendered. Without the objects there, the model doesn't look like anything, if you know what I mean. So as soon as I feel I've run out of time to make the shape look right, I need to like get it colored and I need to get it rendered.
Well, you have to make a lot of compromises in terms of a few things like, well, if you're any kind of perfectionist whatsoever, that goes out the window with any kind of deadline, like the one we had. Also, if you have a strong original concept that you want to stick to, but it becomes too difficult during the process and too time-consuming to try and really pursue that original idea, then some of that might get sacrificed along the way. Not always to the detriment, sometimes it can work in the favour, and I did that with a few of the tracks as the time limit drew nigh.
So, you two are both writers. How does that impact the type of games that you choose to make?
Obviously, our first game we're making together is I'll Be Brave Tomorrow. It's a game made for charity. It's a game made to hopefully make you cry. It's a game that we've put a lot of heart into because I want to tell good stories. I'm a massive indie solo game player, and Edith Finch will always have my heart. Firewatch, Before Your Eyes, which you should play. And I just love like a solo indie experience that will make you feel something. I feel like that's what I want to make myself. That's just my writing influence, especially now how heavy into like literature and stuff we are now. Yeah. In the last literally 2 years, I've got so into reading that I want to just tell stories that make you feel something. And so I think the games that we make are less mechanical, less gameplay heavy, but narratively should still hit the certain beats that we want.
Yeah, I mean, we come from writing backgrounds, but I would definitely say we're more used to kind of more design, you know, just making things in Unity and just kind of making whatever we can. Because as a writer who only knows how to write, there's very little you can actually do in making games. So we've had to pick up a lot of other skills where the writing does influence how we think about every part of game development. So if we look into like just one room in Hobby Graves tomorrow, it's like, okay, we've got to put objects in this room, but what is the significance of these objects? What does this lead to? What is the narrative behind everything? So I think in terms of like our backgrounds being writers, it affects everything we do in Engine. We wanted to make it so that like everything you do advances not only the narrative but also your understanding of the characters and the world they're in. And I think that's kind of quite a core design pillar for us.
Yeah, I think if we've made something, there's intention. It's never just placed. It's made there for the reason for what we want to do.
Yeah.
And some things might not get picked up. Like every great writer, you can write something so great that it's missed by everyone. But as long as one person picks up the subtle detail we're trying to tell by the colour of red we use, then I'm happy.
Yeah, English teachers love us.
The design, yeah, I would say is primarily Archie's own. Of course, if we feel a certain way, like we can always say stuff, like they're never going to stop us. But they're pretty good at what they do. I think the game doesn't struggle to deliver the experience that we've been chasing, really. I mean, it's a narrative game at its core. There's always been like conversation about how we want the story to go, but it's never been so broad that we've had to like properly sit down and discuss it. It's always just been, it's meant to represent escapism in like a confined environment, being a hospital room. This was November time, early November, I think. A couple months in, a month and a bit in to the development process. He just sent me a build of the game one evening, I guess, and just asked me to play it and give me his thoughts. Give him my thoughts, sorry. And basically I was just, I don't know, I knew that he wanted a good game, so I just thought I'd be mean and say everything I thought, even if it wasn't necessarily grounded. Like, I mentioned things like, in my opinion, the jump key was wrong. I think jump was like space or something, when it could have been W, and then glide was shift, and I can't remember what it said, but the controls weren't intuitive. Stuff like movement was very janky, I guess. There's a lot of times where momentum would be like desirable, like there'd be wind that could like push you in a certain direction, but as soon as you got out the wind, your speed would return to zero. And the issue is with like being so early in development and trying to give criticism like this is that a lot of it's going to be obvious and will be changed later anyway. I think, I mean, I'll show you this paragraph that I wrote for him later on so that you can see what I'm talking about. But basically, yeah, I was just as brutal as I could be.
So in terms of our team, like dynamic, we are quite limited because we only have 2 writers, 3 artists. It does kind of like shrink down the scale of the things we can do. Mainly, there's not a lot of technical programming that can go into the games we make. Like we've had some really interesting ideas that we've talked through before for other projects, but we do have to scale them in terms of the programming we have available is quite limited. Also, I'm not essentially an animator. I'm mostly an artist. I've just learned animation for this project, so it's not like my strongest suit. So we do have to scale to these like margins of like, okay, what can we create and what can we do and what can we learn? It was a big thing because Archie and Tom is great. They are great because they have learned to do coding, even though they're writers. It is not in their description anyway to do that job. But they've taken that upon themselves, which is amazing. But it just means we have to be quite careful with everything to make sure we don't overscope.
So we don't have a programmer. We have no programmers. The team currently at InkForge is set up of 2 writers and 3 artists. So programming wise, there's a mixture of tools. Luckily, in the day and age we're in now, there's so many like online tools we can use. The main one, like we've already said, is Fungus. It's a plugin made for Unity, but it's so well developed that it's more than just a narrative tool. We use it to load scenes, we use it to save the actual game itself, we use it for different variables, we use it for score counters, we literally use it for basically our entire process of any game we've made. It's very intuitive. Another great place, Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
Great website that like for coders that are better than myself and Tom, who can't program at all. We can look online and find some amazing tools like that.
Yeah.
So InkForge is 2 writers writing the code for games.
Yes.
And 0 programmers.
Yes.
I feel as though it's now come to the point where programmers have so much control. And I don't know if this is coming out very clearly, but we like having control. And giving someone, it's like giving someone the keys to your car, right? They have so much control over what can happen in that space. So if we let a programmer in and they decide to change all the scripts and then leave, we can't understand. We have no control because everyone scripts things very differently. So I'd be happier hitting my head against the wall for 5 hours trying to make a movement script than getting someone in who does it half-assed, but then we don't understand what he's done, what they've done. So it becomes a case of, I don't want to sacrifice control for someone to do something and for us not to understand it.
For convenience.
Yeah, we know our limitations with scripting now. So we're not gonna make a game which, you know, has the most complex systems and has like 15 different guns which all fire different bullets and you can do all these crazy like parkour maneuvers. That's just not what we want to make either. We want the focus to also mainly just be on the narrative, right? I think if you start adding in really complex mechanics, like I think all the best narrative games are very simple mechanically. Like you think Celeste, you think The Last of Us, and they're not doing anything that hasn't been done before.
Nah, not at all.
It puts the focus purely on the narrative. I think that's why those games kind of shine, and that's why they're such big influences for us as well.
I wanted to ask about your narrative design process.
Okay, so I think because of the way that we are different in terms of like director, so technical versus creative, we both have very different ways of thinking about it. I think even within the game jam, we're experiencing this now where I'm going into it with these crazy branches and wanting to have 15,000 lines of dialogue in like a 10-minute game or something. And then Archie's there going, yeah, but how's that gonna work? So I think it kind of comes down to, again, that conflict between the two directorial minds. So it will kind of come down to like me suggesting we do this one thing and then you actually working out the realistic version of that, and then finding that middle ground where we can do it and it is very unique and original and creative.
Yeah, I think I'll only ever sign off of a Tom idea if I worked out in my head it's possible, and then I agree. But until that moment, I'm forever like a brick wall, I feel like. That's how I describe myself. Of just ideas will hit me until one is like, yeah, that's possible, and then we go with it.
So we had this branching dialogue issue where it was a case of we don't have enough time to really play test this in QA to make sure it's all sound. So if we have branching dialogue with different variables, chances for like soft locking or like just unpolished dialogue, more issues arise when only 1% of players have experienced one branch. So it kind of came down to cutting it down to what was essential, making it as understandable for us as well to make it work. Yes, breaking it down to its core components. Because we are big believers in giving player agency. And even in something as typically linear as a visual novel, we did want to have like our own InkForge identity with it. So we wanted to keep agency, but also make sure that we had enough time to clean it up.
Hi, thanks for watching this behind the scenes look at InkForge Studios. If you are watching this video in the first week that it's out, then we'll still be running our Kickstarter campaign for I'll Be Brave tomorrow. We would love it if you could check it out. The link will be in the description below. Thanks again, and we hope you enjoy our games.